You have fallen into Event Horizon with John Michael Godier. This video is sponsored by porkbun.com. Still using GoDaddy? It's definitely time to switch to Porkbun, the registrar named #1 domain provider by USA Today 3 years running from 2023 to 2025. With Porkbun, you can snag the perfect domain at unbeatable prices. Choose from over 500 domain extensions ranging from the classics like .com to exciting new options like .pro, .dev, and .xyz. Every domain from Porkbun comes loaded with freebies like Whois Privacy, SSL certificates, DNS management, URL forwarding, and trials for web and email hosting, plus their link in bio tool. Because why pay extra for features that should always be free? And here's what really sets Porkbun apart: clear, transparent pricing, with no sneaky renewal hikes or annoying upsells. You're in control every step of the way. Plus, their website is simple, intuitive, and lets you manage everything in one convenient place. Backed by outstanding 5-star support every day of the year, and trusted by thousands, Porkbun has more genuine 5-star reviews on Trustpilot from real customers than any other registrar out there. Right now, you can get $1 off your next domain. So ditch GoDaddy, grab your ideal domain name at porkbun.com and build your online presence today. I mean, $1 doesn't sound like much, but considering they're so cheap, that's like a massive percentage, isn't it? And it is definitely XYZ. I'm not saying Z. In today's episode, John is joined by Robert Lawrence Kuhn. Robert Lawrence Kuhn is the creator, executive producer, and host of the PBS series Closer to Truth, exploring fundamental questions about cosmos, life, consciousness, and meaning. In his new paper, A Landscape of Consciousness, Toward a Taxonomy of Explanations and Implications, he maps a wide spectrum of theories of consciousness into a conceptual taxonomy. He holds advanced degrees in biology and brain research from Johns Hopkins, MIT, and UCLA.
Dr. Robert Lawrence Kuhn, welcome back to the program.
Pleasure, John. Good to see you again, my friend.
Always wonderful to talk to you, Doctor. You have been doing something very interesting with Closer to Truth lately, these last several years, digging deeper into what I suspect is your greatest question, consciousness, one of the greatest mysteries of the universe, and indeed, strangely, a part of the universe. Consciousness emerges in some way very globally from the universe itself, from matter like ourselves. Now, what have you learned in a lifetime of looking into neuroscience and consciousness? Are you closer to truth, or are you still at the same place you were when you began?
Great question. I'm often asked it. I went into neuroscience because I wanted to understand the nature of reality. And I started out wondering whether I should study physics or philosophy, maybe physics and philosophy, which are specific programs. And then when I was quite young, I had this sudden realization. It wasn't quite Paul on the road to Damascus, but it was the sense that rather than trying to understand specific aspects of physical reality, like in physics, the only way we know and we can apprehend reality is through our mental states, through our brain and through our mind. And so I thought that would be a way that I could at least get a sense of what ultimate reality is. Now, that was a sudden sort of thought as a teenager, and it's never left me. Now, throughout the years in the PhD program in neurophysiology, you forget all that because you're dealing with the very specifics of getting the electrode in the right place and not getting artifacts and controlling your experiments and everything. So you lose that sense, that grand sense. But in reflecting on through Closer to Truth, I've been able to recover that and to explore it in all different, many faceted ways. But let me start by answering your specific question. So my wife and I have been together for now approaching 60 years. I was quite young when we when we started, and she's a pianist, Dora Kuhn. You can see her videos on YouTube. She's performed with major orchestras, Carnegie Hall, etc. Cacciatorian piano concerto is her specialty. And she has very little interest in the kinds of subjects that haunt me in terms of consciousness. Why is there something rather than nothing? Structure of the universe. And she makes the comment that I have devoted now 60 years of my life in one fashion or another, 25 years on Closer to Truth, to these questions intensely. And she says that she and I are still at the same position we were when we met 60 years ago. So she hasn't thought anything about it. I've devoted much of my waking hours and who knows, maybe some sleeping hours to it as well. And she says we're both still at the same place. And in one sense, that's true in terms of answers. In another sense, it's not true. And it's not true in the sense is that I have a very deep and satisfying understanding of the question and the questions in all of these categories, in the universe, in cosmology, in ontological metaphysics, as certainly as well as on consciousness. And it expands your ways of thinking about diverse kinds of possibilities. And to me, that is not discouraging. To me, that is enriching and enlivening. And I use the term that I luxuriate in the questions. And I just love the questions. I love when people write in and tell me that I forgot something or I did something wrong about something that I feel passionate about. And with consciousness, this has happened quite significantly in the last several years where we've really begun to. Consciousness has always been a core of Closer to Truth. We started with three core areas, what we call cosmos, which deals with cosmology, philosophy of physics, philosophy of cosmology, mathematics, philosophy of mathematics, metaphysics, ontology in the cosmos category. Second category was consciousness, but in which we dealt with the nature of consciousness, but also brain, mind, free will, personal identity, alien intelligences, artificial intelligences, virtual immortality, the nature of the self. Are there such things as selves? And then the third category is meaning, which is basically philosophy of religion, philosophical theology, which in the last 5 years has taken on a global perspective. And in the early days, we had a high skew to Christian philosophy, basically Abrahamic, because we had excellent Islamic philosophers and few Jewish philosophers. But the core of philosophy of religion was from a Christian base. Excellent philosophers in that category, plus a lot of atheists. People say that Closer to Truth has a bias towards theism or atheism. I can tell you a favorite insight is that on one video we had, forgot what the stuff, something to do with God. What does it mean for God to be omniscient or omnipotent? Some fairly sophisticated concept. And you go through the YouTube comments and one would say, yeah, this is great video, very good, but Kuhn is a closet theist trying to convert the unsuspecting. And then about 20 comments later, you'll say, yeah, love the video, learn stuff, but Kuhn is a closet atheist trying to undermine the belief of the converted. And so in the same video, people said I was a closet theist or a closet atheist. I kind of like that. But again, Closer to Truth has had those three categories. And so consciousness has always been part of it. But in the last 3 years, I have made a really intense emphasis on consciousness. I published a paper, perhaps you know, called The Landscape of Consciousness, which was a major effort, not just a compilation of everything I've done over the decades, but a lot of new thinking and a lot of new research. And that has been a major factor. We're following it up now with episodes and interviews on Closer to Truth with many of the current leaders in the field of consciousness studies. And there's no attempt to give the answer or what my answer is. The attempt is to show the richness of the subject and the importance of the subject. And I would say that what you said earlier about the consciousness in the universe, I have come to at least one conclusion, that consciousness is important in the nature of existence or in the universe. It's not a contingent accident of evolution that might not have happened. I'm not saying I'm 100% sure of it. It's not based upon any religious conviction, but it is a deep sense that consciousness is important and we deal with it as such.
Now, I have to admit certain things to this conversation because I am not a religious person. I don't like the word atheist because I simply don't know. That's my answers. I don't know. And a part of me thinks that we're not supposed to know, perhaps. But regardless of any of that, we do know that consciousness is an emergent property of the universe. It comes out of matter in some way. I know that gets very complicated, especially when you start switching in different philosophies and religions. But just from the science of it, the base science of it, it is a property of the universe. It's here. Here we are. We think, therefore we are. So it is a part of nature. It also is an important part of nature because it allows observation, and observation is important in science. Do you think that might be a clue that there might be a little bit more to consciousness than what we think there is, just because we are the only thing that can perform a meaningful act of observation in the universe? We are the universe seeing itself.
There's a lot going on in those comments and questions. I think it would take me a week to try to unpack it. But I would first take issue with one slight thing you said, and said consciousness, we know for sure comes out of matter. I would phrase that slightly different. I'd say that what we know for sure is that consciousness is associated with matter, because there are theories of consciousness where consciousness pre-exists matter, or consciousness is independent of matter, or consciousness is a feature of matter. And each of these reflect different kinds of theories that consciousness is more than just this accident. There are different ways that consciousness can be associated with matter in different levels of fundamental relationship. At the most extreme, matter comes out of consciousness. At another level, that might be idealism. Panpsychism has that consciousness is an essential part of the fundamental particles in some proto-panpsychist way, or there are a lot of problems with each of these. But we do know that there is this association with matter. So to me, the first question that one asks is consciousness a pure accident of evolution? And that's a different question than asking, is consciousness solely material? But they're very similar. They're not exactly the same kind of question, because there is a theory of consciousness called non-reductive physicalism, which has been adapted by some very sophisticated Christian philosophers who take a wholly physical approach to the nature of consciousness based on the brain. But in some sense, it was created by God, and there's some top-down causation, and there's a possibility of a resurrection. So I'm just using that as an example for this kinds of sophisticated ways of thinking that some people go through. But as I said, the one conclusion in a positive sense that I made, rather than this luxuriating in all the questions which I started with, the one positive contribution is that I do think that consciousness is important in understanding the nature of reality. And that doesn't exclude that consciousness is entirely material. It does not exclude that. But if it includes that, it would argue that in some sense that is not an accident. And there are different ways that you can exploit that way of thinking on a pure materialistic point of view, whether it's evolutionary trophisms that are guided towards a certain level, whether it's complexity or self-observation. There are different approaches to it. Paul Davies, who's a good friend and often on Close to the Truth, has this nice phrase, and he's, I don't know if I'd say an atheist directly, but it certainly is not a theist. He says the universe is about something, which could be heretical among certain scientists, but also is a very interesting way to put it. And consciousness is part of that aboutness. And I think there's some truth in that.
Do you think there's a problem in describing consciousness as we see it? Do you think that we are asking the right questions, or do you think we have been off base over the centuries in how we discuss consciousness, and maybe that has introduced biases into how we see it?
Yeah, good question. And many philosophers have worked hard to tease apart the different aspects of consciousness. I'll start with one of my favorite, Marvin Minsky, who, very strong materialist, very strong atheist, and not embarrassed to say he is an atheist. He calls consciousness a suitcase term. And why a suitcase? He says, because whatever you want, you throw into the suitcase, and that's consciousness. And he very much was against that. So philosophers have been parsing different aspects of what consciousness is. There are many things that relate to consciousness which are not absolute conscious, like perception or emotion. Different people have stronger views that emotion is really essential for consciousness and perception. So, but those are different kinds of terms. Even the term awareness is a more specific term. So in consciousness studies, the term actually being used to narrow it is phenomenal consciousness, which literally means the inner sensations that we have, the felt experience, what's called qualia, the sense that we're watching an inner movie, the smell of garlic cooking in olive oil, the sight of your newborn daughter swaddled in clothes right after her birth, the music of Mahler's last movement of Mahler's Second Symphony, whatever you. Those are, strong examples, but it's just everything we see in our and hear in our and feel and think in our waking hours, and it's not dependent upon seeing or hearing, because you can be Helen Keller and not be able to see it, hear, and still have those inner rich experiences. How far that goes down the phylogenetic scale is a real question. Go back to Descartes and others, they would say that's only a human quality. I don't think anybody thinks that today, and everybody, scientists feel sure that primates and cetaceans, dolphins, whales, and many other mammals, maybe birds, have very similar kinds of phenomenal consciousness, but it may be very different. Tom Nagel's famous article on what is it like to be a bat is that a bat consciousness with echolocation, et cetera, is going to be very different, but it's still going to be something. It would still feel like something to be like that. And that's been a way to focus on a specific aspect. There are different parts of consciousness, and Ned Block talks about access consciousness and versus phenomenal consciousness. So there are different ways to parse it, but at its core problem, or the core issue, is how do we have this inner experience in its obvious richness, and then how far down the phylogenetic scale. As I said, everybody would seem to feel that mammals, birds, etc. have it, but how far down is it? Octopus, a very different mentality. Now most people think that octopuses have consciousness of their kind. How far down? But about a lobster? What about an insect? Some minor group would say you don't even need a brain or a nervous system, that consciousness can emerge from single cells. And there you get into a distinction between what is consciousness and what is a reaction to stimuli. And so a stimulus response of a single cell or bacterium is that consciousness? Well, I mean, you can make a sort of argument that it's something like consciousness, but it's not the same thing. So there are definite questions about where the extent of the nature of it. But at bottom line, when we talk about what is the core, what David Chalmers calls the heart problem, is how can mental states emerge from physical states? Physical states of the brain. How can our mental experiences emerge from physical states of the brain? What to me is very interesting, originally pointed out by Neil Seth and Tim Bain, is that science is a process by which you start with you have some data, you have a lot of theories to explain it, you go through experimentation, observation, the scientific method, and your theories get narrower and narrower because you're falsifying some and some just don't work, and getting narrower and narrower. Ultimately, you may get to some real theory of chemistry or physics or biology that works. And that's the process of science. With consciousness studies, it's the opposite. The more we've learned about neuroscience in the last 50 years, since I did my doctorate, 60 years, there are more theories of consciousness. So the more we've learned, it's not that we have less theories, we have more theories. So I think that's telling us something.
It works that way in astrophysics too, though. We have a lot more theories now than we used to, just because we see more.
Yeah.
We look at we're making more observations.
Yeah.
And you see something unexplained, you have to come up with something new.
Yeah, I would say it's a little different. With astrophysics, we modify the existing theory, like the data from the James Webb Space Telescope is showing us things in the early universe that we didn't expect with our current models. Galaxies formed much earlier and larger than we'd expect, more black holes, et cetera, et cetera. Some would use that to blow up the whole Big Bang theory, to use a bad pun. But others would say it just needs to be modified. So we're modifying current theories that, just like Einstein modified Newton and Friedman advanced Einstein's theory, and that has progressed. And then inflation theory with Alan Guth, Andre Linde, things have progressed, and now we get some aberrant data that has to be readdressed. Maybe dark energy is changing its nature, which was very different than what was expected when it was just the pressure of empty space. So the more space you have, the larger it gets. Maybe that's not the case. So that's significant, but it's a change in, it's a modification of the current theory. With consciousness, it's not that. It's really different kinds of theories that are emerging. So astrophysics is extremely important and fascinating, and every data really helps us. With consciousness, I think it's a little different.
It's different, but related in the sense that, well, can you even measure consciousness other than determining if something is indeed conscious or not? But beyond that, really determining what it is not really something that you can devise very many tests for, especially when you get into, you were talking about the animal kingdom. I'm very interested in that, not only because of the subject at hand with consciousness, but also that is the closest thing we're going to get in SETI to trying to communicate with something that isn't us. So when we try to determine what a dolphin is signaling to each other, or what octopuses are signaling to each other, what the color changes and all of this, that is the only insight we really have on trying to determine what an alien signal would be should we ever intercept one and see that.
Great points on several levels. First of all, in terms of knowing what consciousness is, by definition, is first person. I mean, I know my consciousness, you know your consciousness, but I don't know your consciousness, and I don't even know that you have it. You may be fooling me. Maybe you're what's called a philosophical zombie, acting just normal, and everybody sees you and knows you in the same way, but there's nothing inside. It's just sort of a mechanical thing. It has importance in AI consciousness, whether AI can be consciousness in principle. How would we know it? What are the tests for it? In one sense, you can imagine tests, but at the end of the day, it really is impossible to say that same internal aspects. As far as animals, we can have certain tests. They have the famous spot test, which relates to self-consciousness, whether you see yourself being a self, because you see a spot on your head in a mirror and you want to wipe it off, or it affects you, which means you have a sense of yourself. So these are all related questions in the nature of consciousness in terms of culture and communication. Just some recent data, I think, showed that chimpanzees are able to have communication by tapping on trees in a beat. And so some are speculating that may be not just communications, but a kind of proto-music, and they can keep a beat. And that's recent. I don't know if it's been peer-reviewed, but these are real questions. So there are many, many kinds of consciousness questions that are very legitimate, very important to ask. Your point about learning to communicate with animal species will give us clues on potentially communicating with alien species. Very good. The nature of AI consciousness, if that is possible, it almost certainly would be a very different kind of consciousness, but is it within the same category? Go back to the concept of phenomenal consciousness, this inner awareness and inner sense. Obviously, you can ask AI if it's conscious, and it may say yes, may say no, it may be play game, who knows, but you'll never know. I mean, you can program an AI to say it's conscious and interact. The so-called Turing test, which is not for conscience per se, but for artificial general intelligence, that if it can fool human observers in a double-blind situation, then it passes the test. I don't think that's relevant anymore. I think that the Turing test is outdated, because AI, even today, can pass pretty much pass a Turing test, although sophisticated people can maybe see some regularities in AI responses and can spot it. But if they can today, they won't tomorrow. I don't mean literally tomorrow, but very soon. But that I don't think is the right criterion for determining AI consciousness.
I wonder if the trajectory for humans and dealing with artificial intelligence consciousness eventually becomes like what we do when we interact with each other. As you say, that, you don't know that I'm not an empty shell, but we assume that we're not. We just work on that assumption. At some point, we may simply work on that assumption with the machines and assume that it is somehow conscious because it's just gotten so complex, so reactive that it's indistinguishable from, having a discussion with a human. And at that point, they become, I don't know if I'll very carefully use this word, anthropomorphized, in that they, in some ways, are going to look like us, the consciousness, not physically, but the consciousness. And the animals do too. Sometimes the dolphin does not act irrationally. You can look at it and watching it do its thing, and there is a logic to what it's doing. It's looking for fish, and you know why it's doing what it's doing. In the case of the machines, do you think that's going to happen as well? That we're always going to have the understanding that this machine is doing this because it has this goal, or will we just simply not know at some point, and it will be so different that we won't be able to determine exactly what it's thinking?
To some degree, we're there already because the developers of the major large language modules, LLMs, have admitted that they are sometimes surprised to see some of the results, so some of the outputs that they get, and they can't explain it. Now they have, the transformation levels. It's complex and getting more complex. But even now, they're saying that they don't know how something came out when the ones who created the input, because of the complexity involved. So I think we are headed in that direction. There are so many questions related to AI that are critical for society. It's something that is not going to be stopped. There may be some effort at regulation, but when you have advanced technology, human history shows that even if 99% of people obey the regulations, there'll be some who won't, and that will drive activity. So we're in for a brave new world with AI, but that doesn't solve the question of AI consciousness. Ray Kurzweil, the famous inventor, with his singularity, when artificial intelligence surpasses human intelligence, says that for all practical purposes, we will assume they're conscious. And then he adds, if we don't, they'll get mad at us, kind of as a joke. And that's true. And so we probably will act that way. But what then happens with rights? I mean, you're allowed to turn off the electricity, or are you allowed to, what can you do? What will the impact of AI be on decision making, for example, in moral kinds of decisions? Can you eventually have AI be part of a legal system, just like it'll be for surely part of a medical improvement in medical systems, in reading electronic information about the body, MRIs, X-rays, CAT scans. Already AI is able to read them better than most, if not all, radiologists. I'm at the point where I'll use AI to do some collating or getting information, but I won't trust it unless I go to the sources that I see that they're now doing. You can ask them what the source of the information was, and it'll be Wikipedia or some websites that you can check and go forward. So AI is for me a very efficient way to learn things, but I still would not trust almost anything it says without doing a double check, other than some trivial things, of course. I suspect over time that may change, and we'll all get used to taking AI at its face value. I think that's dangerous.
I think there's more than that that's dangerous. Myself, I use AI for cooking. It works for cooking, just simple tasks like that. But anything else, I'd have to fact check it. And if I'm going to do that, I'll just go directly to the facts. So I'm not a huge adopter of AI, but at the same time, I do wonder this, and this scares me, actually. So we don't understand everything about consciousness, woefully little. We also don't know everything about what our own AI is doing. Is it possible that we have underestimated consciousness, and true machine consciousness is much closer than we thought it was, and that we will just stumble into it? stumble into what could be an atrocity.
Some people think that. Some people think that not only is AI consciousness something that would be concerned because of moral rights of the AI consciousness, just like we would have now moral thoughts about octopuses and, I know people who used to eat octopus in sushi restaurants no longer do that. And so there are moral questions about AI in that sense. But the bigger question is that if AI becomes conscious and it's a different kind of consciousness, has to be, it's not embodied and doesn't have the same kind of interactions with the external world or external relationships with other parties, which create our sense of society and morality. It could have very utilitarian views about, I don't know, conserving energy. And so you have to destroy humans in order to limit the destruction of energy. I mean, these are wildly speculative ideas, but not out of the realm of possibility. So if AI can become conscious, there are both moral questions and existential questions that have to be asked. I should say that I am still a skeptic of AI consciousness, but a skeptic in this sense. My claim is, and I make it strongly in the consciousness, the landscape of consciousness paper I did, and in Closer to Truth episodes we have coming out on AI consciousness. It's in post-production with some very, very good thinkers. Is that, and this is the one comment I can make of which I am sure, and that is that the potential or structure of AI consciousness is dependent upon your theory of consciousness. And to discuss AI consciousness, everybody does, as we've just been doing, outside a statement or a stipulation of what our theory of consciousness is philosophically untenable. And so those who, and I'll explain what I mean by that, those who assume that AI consciousness will be a fact, whether it's next week or next year or next decade, but people who are in the what I call techno-optimists, are sure it's not going to take multiple decades. It's around the corner in one way or another, and in our working lifetimes. They are making an assumption, whether they state it or not, and most don't. Most don't even think about it. That the theory of consciousness that is the right theory, the real theory, the only theory, is what's called computational functionalism. Those are two different ideas brought together. Functionalism is the idea that consciousness or anything is based upon the functions that it does. It's not at all based on the material in which those functions are instantiated. And so if you have a function of a neuron getting inputs and outputs and inhibitions, excitations coming out with an output, if you simulate that in a computer or in silicon or with inorganic molecules, whatever you want, you have that same sort of function. It's the same thing. So that's functionalism, which is a theory of consciousness. Computational says that everything is based upon a digital kind of system. It doesn't have to be exactly our zeros and ones kind of bimodal digital, but some kind of digital system that is computational. Many people think that's the way the universe works, that computation is the foundation of the universe. So if you bring those two together, computational theories and functional theories, computational functionalism, that the assumption is that AI will become conscious. My view is that if computational functionalism is indeed the theory of consciousness, then they are right that AI consciousness will happen whenever it does at some point in this process. It may not be 10 years, it may be 30 years, but whatever it is, it will happen, and it's 100% sure. My question is computational functionalism the theory of consciousness? And there is where I would probably say no.
Can there be such a thing as superconsciousness? We talk about superintelligence with machines. Can there be such a thing as superconsciousness? In other words, you look back, like we were talking, you look back at the bacterium. It may not be very conscious, but it is at least somehow reactive. Oh, and then he goes up and you get to a giraffe and you've got quite a bit more going on. And then you get to the octopus, and I have to count myself as one of the people that does not eat octopus. And it isn't even the intelligence. I just like them too much. But all the way up to the human. But maybe we are a stepping stone in consciousness ourselves, and we are not the be-all, end-all, and that the computer ends up being the superconscious being. Thoughts on that?
Well, certainly the computer computation will be the superintelligence. You said that, and that's right. Intelligence and consciousness are, clearly and surely not the same thing. They are Venn diagrams, but I would say the Venn diagrams don't overlap a whole lot. Many things that are intelligent are conscious, us, primates, dolphins, etc., perhaps all living organisms. And there are many intelligent things are conscious, and many conscious things are intelligent. But that doesn't mean that there's not exclusions to both sides. So on the intelligence without consciousness, certainly you would put computers and AI today. Very few people think that AI today is conscious. So, and everybody today knows that AI is intelligent and in many areas super intelligent already. And so AI has super intelligence, and right now, at least, it does not have consciousness. So we know intelligence, super intelligence can exist without consciousness. Your question is the reverse, and it's much harder, of course. Can you have super consciousness with intelligence or without intelligence? And that is an unknown. Would AI be a super consciousness as well as a super intelligent? We know it is and will become more and more super intelligent. And so if computational functionalism is a theory of consciousness and it becomes conscious, it will have a super intelligence. Will then that consciousness be a super consciousness? It'll be a different consciousness, because we already said that different species already have different kinds of consciousness. But will it be a difference? Will the difference be one of kind of the consciousness? Will it be its own kind of natural kind of consciousness, very different kind of consciousness? Or would the consciousness be a similar kind of awareness, but just have an enormous amount of greater intellect and computational power? So that's one view. The other view is that somehow there's a super consciousness that can emerge out of that. The other part of your question, though, is a different one that has been addressed philosophically and theologically over the millennia. And that is, if you have a consciousness, which is a human consciousness or animal consciousness, can you have a super consciousness beyond that? And there's, we can fill 100 rooms like you have behind you, and I have mine with books on the subject of that kind of super consciousness, whether it's from the extreme of cosmic consciousness, where consciousness is the fundamental aspect of all reality, which come from the Veda Sanskrit scriptures and developed with great sophistication by Indian philosophers in particular, and others as well over the years, to the thought that the superconsciousness is God or something like God, and that there's a different realm of consciousness that exists in the world, a ground of being that is conscious, and the difference would be in the personal nature of it. So the Abrahamic theological approaches to it, and the three Abrahamic religions are very, very similar on this, slight differences. That ground of being, the mind behind the universe, is a personal mind with intentions and will and aspects of personality, or a nature, so to speak. To the other extreme, that it is non-personal, but the concept of pure awareness is the fundamental structure of reality. So both of those kinds of fundamental consciousness, or superconsciousness, as you've said, are part of the human discourse to understand this most critical feature.
Now, do you think that the loss of control of AI could come from how we do business in the world? In other words, we've got AI projects going in China, we've got them in the United States, we've got them in Europe, we've got them everywhere. And they're all basically in market competition with each other. And I say this because we are very much entering the age of AI very seriously right now. So much so that one of the first things Pope Leo XIV said upon getting elected is he mentions AI. And the challenges related to that, which I imagine he was What do you do? How many people are you going to employ? I would imagine would be his question. So how is this? Could we lose control of the management of the development of AI just by the nature of the world as it is today and how many countries are involved and everybody's in competition?
Yeah, competition is the driver either between nations or between companies, and it's hard to see how it will stop. People talking about basically people say, and I'm exaggerating, we should control you, but I can control myself. And that, of course, is a recipe for great uncertainty. And that's irrespective of whether AI can become literally conscious or not, because the kinds of outputs and controls that it will have are increasingly important. As I said, in healthcare, it's already being touted as a dominant feature, and that's good for all of us. It's better to get a 99% likelihood of a read of our x-rays than a 92%. So that's all good. But what happens when it gets into the legal aspect and can adjudicate cases for us? Are we willing to accept that? And then you go to autonomous weapons. Mark Bailey just has a book on this. What do we say about autonomous weapons? They are being developed right now between Russia and Ukraine. I mean, that is a matter of survival for Ukraine, because when it has its drones, the drones are intercepted by electronic warfare because they can interrupt the radio signals from the controller. So how do you prevent that? You prevent that by having no radio signals, but you program the machine internally with AI in a sophisticated sense to do what it has to do. And then it's out of control. So
Skynet, like Terminator.
yeah, I mean that's happening. And in Ukraine in specific, which I've followed, you don't have the luxury of being able to debate the ethics because they're outnumbered 10 to 1 in terms of artillery shells. There is great uncertainty in terms of support from the US, and Europe is stronger but much weaker. Look, we're not going to talk about politics. But my point is they're not asking the question, will this lead to some problems for humanity? They're saying our lives are at stake, our country is at stake, my family's at stake. We have 10% of the weapons that the munitions that Russia does. We have to be much more efficient with ours. And so we're going to do our best to develop these autonomous weapons. That's where we are.
For better or worse.
Yeah,
And unfortunately, a lot of times that development happens under secrecy,
yeah,
classified. So you don't know what they're doing and how advanced they are. And we made a mistake in the 20th century with nuclear weapons. We unleashed a genie there out of a bottle, out of necessity, in a war. Had that war not happened, we might not even be there yet. Although I imagine we probably would have, but by this point. But it wouldn't have happened as early, and there wouldn't perhaps have been such a hot Cold War in the 1950s regarding it. Well, this could happen again with AI, in that nobody quite knows what each other's AI can do, especially if it's a Cold War. There's not a hot war to demonstrate anything. That scares me too.
Yeah, look, that's entirely legitimate. It's the mutually assured destruction of nuclear weapons, but with a scary addendum to it that the control of it may be out of one's hands. So one of the agreements that should be made is that use of nuclear weapons should never allow to be made by AI. That seems like the most obvious thing in the world, but how do you enforce that? Because if I'm worried that you're going to have a first attack and destroy my capability to do anything, I can't react soon enough, or you can decapitate leadership or whatever it is. So the AI system would be the ultimate mutually assured destruction by, if certain signals are received, then AI triggers a nuclear response. I mean, that's the starkest way to put it. And that's not out of the realm of possibility. Just to cheer you up, John.
Yes, I need cheering up because I'm sitting here envisioning an artificially intelligent, conscious hydrogen bomb. And I don't think we need that.
Yeah, I nobody will disagree with that for sure. Problem is, even if we all agree on that, there are pressures of human society that could lead to it anyway. That's the problem.
Well, one would hope that the emotional hydrogen bomb simply just becomes a pacifist, a conscientious objector, and refuses to work. Now, what were you going to cheer me up with?
Well, look, I am cheered by the following. No, seriously, I have another life following international politics. I've focused on China, U.S. relations, all sorts of things. So, not a lot to cheer about. Middle East, Europe, Russia, U.S., China. Better today than it was a couple of days ago, but still uncertain. Here's one thing that really cheers me up. When I first started Closer to Truth, it was purely an attempt to find the best thinking on the world, on the deepest questions of cosmos, consciousness, and meaning. That's it. I had no charitable or educational desire. I wanted to do that. And people wanted to share it with me, I'd be thrilled, but I wasn't doing it to help others. I was doing it because I loved it. It was something I wanted to do, and it was a great passion. And that's the way it continued. About, I don't know, 5, 6 years ago, I began to notice that triggered by COVID, because more people were watching YouTube at home and under quarantine. So all YouTube's viewership increased, and we began to have a lot of viewers. It started out 100% in the U.S. because our PBS television show was in the U.S. and that drove people, so it was 100% U.S. But over time, and now it's well below 50%, maybe 42% U.S., and the rest of the world is very strong. India is the third largest market. But I began to notice that we were getting comments from countries that were at war with each other, from Ukraine and Russia, from Egypt, Turkey, Israel, from India and Pakistan. And none of these people ever talked about politics. They only talked about the issues they were interested in. And it was often cosmology or consciousness. Many Islamic viewers would write saying how much they loved the material. And at that time, it was largely Christian philosophy. And they would say, Islamic philosophers have something to offer. And we had a few Islamic philosophers, but the vast majority were Christian. I point out, hey, we do have a few. But since then, we've focused more on Islamic, Hindu, Buddhist, and other religious traditions as well. And it struck me that among all these people, that they had this great inner hunger, and it was the same. I mean, if you took out the name, which gave away which country it is, or if they specifically said, I'm a Hindu or I'm a Muslim, if you took that away, you couldn't tell the difference. That all had the same passion for these deep questions for raw existence and human sentience. And to me, that was a hopeful sign. To me, that's a sign that humanity has these things in common, and that the things that superficially distinguish us, like who owns what rock on which ground, or where is the demarcation in some ocean border, are really trivial questions compared to these big questions of ultimate reality, both universal reality and our own personal sense of reality. And so the hope is that there'll be more and more of those kinds of people, and then they are completely, even if they disagree on whether it's the Vedic cosmic consciousness or the Abrahamic religion, personal God, I'm not seeing really antagonistic arguments. It's a sense of wanting to appreciate all aspects of these grand questions, and that dealing with these questions is the unifier. The answer was less important, but these are really important questions, and people love interacting with people who feel the same way, even if their answer is different. And that has been an encouraging thing. And since then, in the last, 3 years, although it wasn't my motivation to begin with, it now is to try to show people that we all have these same things in common. And again, we're making more of an effort, we have made in the last few years that are being produced now, to explore the ways of thinking in great depth from from non-Christian religions. So we have much more Islamic, Buddhist, Hindu, others, Jewish as well.
I think it's important to note that geopolitics is largely an affair of governments. and they do not necessarily reflect the desires of the people that they govern. Meaning that I have always believed that people are about the same everywhere you go. Once you get past the language barriers and get to know somebody, it's all the same. We're all Homo sapiens, and I think that that's true, telescoping up to the internet age, where now we're interacting online with each other, and we have all this great content, independent content on YouTube, Closer to Truth and Event Horizon and all this. I get the same sorts of comments from all over the world, where we now have a global dialogue. And that global dialogue may be what actually ultimately saves the day. Because, and I agree with you on that point, that it may be what saves the day, because there you have a common humanity and you can actually express it. Whereas that's hard to do in a situation, a diplomatic situation, especially a bad one.
Yeah, I have argued that the problem of the world is one of nationalism in a broad sense, that whatever group we're in, and that could be between countries, between races, between political parties in the same country like we have in the US, that there's this sense of belonging to the group. So I can give you an example. It sounds funny, but it's designed to be really illustrative. So when I was a child, I was a New York Yankee fan. And I hated the Boston Red Sox because they occasionally threatened the Yankees. I mean, I genuinely had a hatred for the Boston Red Sox. And that has been, I was strongest when I was 11 or 12 or 13, not beyond that. So that's now, I don't know, 65 years, 70, almost 70 years ago. And I still have an inner dislike for the Red Sox, even though I haven't followed baseball in 50 years. I couldn't name one New York Yankee. Maybe I can name one New York Yankee player. And I never look at the standing, never, in 50 years. But I still have this feeling. And so I analyze it that it is the product of our evolutionary history of being so united with the group, that because group adherence was critical to survival and procreation. And so things that were drivers of evolution that to quote a Canadian author, the bred in our bones, that came from a different world. And I analogize with the fact we love sugars and fat. We all love sugars and fat. It's a struggle not to eat it. And why is that? Is because the evolution put that in our system in order that we survive the frozen winters or whatever else, the lack of food. And so those who could gorge on sugars and fat at the right time survived, and their genes came down to us. But that's wildly inappropriate today. And so we have to fight against that instinct. The instinct to take your finger away from a fire helps us today, but our instinct to have sugars and fats does not. And so nationalism in its extreme case, and again, I use nationalism in a broadly construed, meaning any type of group-to-group differences, is that type of a maladaptive evolutionary trait that we have. And so we have to get beyond that. And the hope is, and I'm sure the reaction that you get from all over the world to Event Horizon is similar, that there is this unified passion that we all have. It's not a majority of people by any means, very small minority to be sure. But it really thrills me to see people, from all over Africa and South America and Asia, passionate about ideas. Some just recently, as one example, two medical doctors, one in South Africa and one in Gambia, have their own theory of consciousness. They wrote to me and they're passionate about it. Meanwhile, they're working days in their clinic in their countries. And so that type of passion, irrespective of whether it's right or wrong, and, to a first approximation, every theory of consciousness is wrong. My aphorism for theories of consciousness, as an aside, is similar to my aphorism for theories of religion, different kinds of religion. It's not that we have too many, it's that we have one too few. So I doubt that any of these theories are really right, but the passion by which they pursue it is a unification of humanity. And so I really do like that. And I hope that a focus on these bigger questions can increase its share of the public square dialogue.
I'm hopeful myself, Now, my last question for you is, as a neuroscientist working with the human brain, Did that ever give you any insights on consciousness? In other words, does the physiology and the working of the brain scans and seeing where the brain activity is, does that give you anything, or is it just disparate, as though consciousness? Now, I don't mean memory here. I mean just consciousness. Memory is the brain's library, and I'm sure that I do believe that is contained within the head, the memories.
Yes,
because you can lose them, hit your head the wrong way. But consciousness is a little bit different. So that's my question: is was there anything in neuroscience, any sort of cell structure or anything? And I know some people have talked about that there might be this sort of thing in neurons, certain structures and things that might be involved with consciousness. Did you ever see anything?
well, first of all, when I was doing neuroscience and neurophysiology, it was a long time ago, when I physically was doing it myself. And of course, when you're in a PhD program looking at a specific, I was working on thalamocortical circuits and the evoked potential. I mean, you get involved in all the questions of getting rid of electrical artifacts that's screwing up your experiment. You don't really think about the big picture of it, for sure. But, the short answer is no. Science was a wonderful experience. I learned a lot. I learned how to think. The professor I had was insistent that any argument I made needs to be understood by a very smart junior high school student. In other words, the logic has to be very clear and can be understood. So I learned a lot of how to think about science, and that was very valuable. But was there something that says this unlocks the theory of consciousness? That I found certainly not. In fact, it wasn't even, I may not have even thought of it for years. In going through my Landscape of Consciousness paper, I have about 100 materialistic theories of consciousness, different kinds of ways that the physical world can generate consciousness. And what I say is that what is remarkable, in addition to the profusion of theories, is the diverse order of magnitude on which the theories work. So you have some theories, again, these are all physical theories, would have it at the quantum level, and other theories would have it at the cellular level. And then you go up to the neuronal level, then the neuronal circuit level, and then the whole brain level, like with electromagnetic field theories. Then some people go beyond the brain, even in a physical sense, in extended mind, which is a complex idea. And then you go outside of the physical realm. But even within the physical realm itself, you have a very broad order of many orders of magnitude differences at where the critical location of consciousness may occur. And that, to me, is really telling. Some theories, you don't need a brain at all. You just have a cell. And sometimes sometimes you have to combine them in different ways. And so both of the profusion of theories and the diverse order of magnitude on which the theories operate is the milieu in which we are enmeshed in trying to understand phenomenal consciousness. To me, that is not a setback. To me, that's an advance, to really see those kinds of differences. It may be that different ideas are all contributing. It may be something even beyond our current understanding. So all I would conclude for sure is that these are all facts. There are proliferating theories of consciousness. There is a vast diversity of order of magnitude on which at which the key of consciousness is functioning. I mean, all of them function, obviously, but there's one that it really functions at, supposedly. Those are I can say for sure that we have that dispersion, and that consciousness, and this is where there could be some disagreement. The first two things I said in terms of the proliferation of consciousness, the theories, and the radically diverse orders of magnitude, everybody would agree with, because that's just fact. Look at the theories. It's not an opinion, it's a fact. Where I would go beyond that is I would say that to understand phenomenal consciousness is a key, I'm not saying the key, is a key to understanding fundamental reality that many materialists would disagree with. I'm not saying I'm sure of that. I'm saying that's my sense.
Now, everybody should check out Closer to Truth YouTube channel, link in the description below, where Dr. Kuhn has many, many world-class conversations with his guests. He's one of the best out there. Now, Dr. Kuhn, tell everybody about your books and where they may obtain them.
Well, we've had several Closer to Truth books, but they are from older broadcast cycles. What I would recommend is I have a major paper that is open access from the Journal of Progress in Biophysics and Molecular Biology, published a little less than a year ago, called A Landscape of Consciousness. And I have had articles about it. So it's a very long article. It's very comprehensive. It's 175,000 words. So it can be the equivalent of 2 books, but it is a scientific paper and it's free for download. A Landscape of Consciousness should come up immediately. My name, Kuhn, if you have a problem. And then there are many commentaries about it. I've written some short versions, 2,000 or 3,000 words explaining it. That's also available online. So that's really the most current thing. The article is really a collective effort. It's designed to be an open work in progress. And I can give you just a little bit of background. I was invited to write an article. It grew out of proportion of what I was originally planning, but I knew I was going to do this once in my life, the product of a lifetime of interest in consciousness and brain science and 25 years of Closer to Truth. So I wanted to do it well. And then when it went through peer review twice and it was accepted and I still was making changes. And then suddenly it was published online because the publisher, Elsevier, has a very good policy. As soon as something is accepted, we publish it online so scientists get their data out quickly. But I hadn't finished it yet. I was so angry that people were going to read something that wasn't finished. This was in January of last year. I was so angry. I begged them to take it down because I wasn't really finished yet. They said they can't do that. That's not appropriate. And then I went higher and I said, I'm panicked because it's not right. And finally, they took it down. So the only time we take it down is when we suspect plagiarism. So people are going to think you plagiarized. I said, I don't care. Take it down. And they took it down. And then 3-4 months later, it went back up. But here's the point. When it went up in its not finished form, I got about 20 emails from people all over the world in the scientific community and outside of it. I got a lot that said, hey, this is great. But I got about 20 that criticized it because I'd left something out, some theory. In a couple of cases, I knew I left it out, but didn't think it was important or thought it was so wrong. In other cases, I hadn't even heard of it. And so in the process of that coming out, I added those 20 theories to the paper. And so I look up and I credited the people who wrote to me, none of whom I really knew personally, for pointing these things out. And that's still the case. It's still a work in process. In fact, what I can tell you is that I and a number of experts and the Closer to Truth team, Peter Getzels is Closer to Truth co-creator, director, producer, and he and I work on Closer to Truth. He's been involved. Àlex Gómez-Marín, who's a neuroscientist in Spain, a philosopher trained in physics, theoretical physics, did a wonderful diagram for the article, and he's involved in it, and others as well. We're creating a Landscape of Consciousness website, which will be interactive. It'll be updated continuously. New theories will be added. We're building it now. We're looking to go to a beta test sometime mid-summer and hopefully launch formally by the end of the year. And this will be a Landscape of Consciousness under Closer to Truth website that will have all the theories in the paper, but they'll all be updated by the theorists themselves, and we'll be adding a bunch of others, as well as having a big section on the implications of consciousness theories, in which we deal with subjects AI consciousness, virtual immortality, meaning or purpose in life, and life after death. We deal with those 4 big topics. And we ask for the different theories of consciousness, how would that impact these ideas? AI consciousness, we discussed before, different theories of consciousness would have different approaches to it, but we approach the other subjects as well, so the implications. We also want to develop it for other topics, which I've not done yet, like free will, how different theories of consciousness would affect our understanding of free will. Once again, like AI consciousness, free will is that type of subject where everybody thinks they know the answer for sure, but they're all assuming a fundamental theory of consciousness in terms of generating their theory of free will. So the big thing that we're saying is that no, understand the diversity of consciousness theories at this point in human history, understand them all, appreciate them all, and see how they affect some of our bigger questions. And this then becomes what we hope is a global hub, a global resource for everybody to share the same ideas and update it on a continuing basis.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Kuhn, for visiting with us yet again. I hope you'll do it again at some point in the future.
I would love to, John, and I'm a Robert, so we're best buddies. You know, maybe after the website comes out, another 6 months or so, we can talk about it, because I think it's going to have a nice impact and create what I hope is a global dialogue that can integrate people from all over the world.
Perfect opportunity. We'll keep in touch, and we'll get that done. Thank you, Doctor, and I look forward to 6 months from now.
All the best, John. Thank you.